I'm always telling you to read your Bibles. Read your Bibles. So many people think the Bible is boring, and some of it is, of course. But do you know in the Bible there's two stories of how David spared Saul's life? Today we heard one version where he snuck into the camp at night and took, Saul was asleep, so David took his spear and his water jug and then went up on the nearby mountain the next day and said, "Here it is, king, I spared your life, come and get it." The other story is that David and his men went into an inner cave to hide from Saul. Unbeknownst to David and Saul, Saul went into the same cave to ease nature. Got it? While he was doing his job, David snuck up behind him and cut off the end of his cloak. And then later went up on the hill and said, "Here, king, come and get your cloak. I have spared your life." So that might be an interesting, you might look that up if you want this afternoon. So we are formed by our life experiences. We're formed, first of all, by our parents. Do you ever think about that? The older we get, the more we're like our parents. Doesn't that scare you at times? And that's the challenge of parenting. And that's just the given in life. And then add to that our life experiences, things that have happened to us. And it's because now that we can adjust that. Even if you were formed by parents that were not good at forming you, you can change it. We're not locked into that. And even though life might have treated you unfairly, and you might be disgruntled by that, we can still filter that and change that. But that's the way we're formed. Now, if we don't change it, we will treat others the same way that others have treated us. If life has been unfair to you and you don't adjust it consciously, you will treat others unfairly. It's just the way we're formed. Or you will treat others the way you think God treated you or treats you. Because so many people think God is up there, out there, and when bad things happen, it's God that's doing it. And it's not. Just like our parents, even maybe they might have not done the best job, they were still on our side helping us. And God is our parent, we're God's children, so God's on our side trying to help us through the problems of life. And that's because we have, and not everything goes well for most of us. And that's a lot of it is free will. And I say it so often. Everybody says, God, don't worry, God's in charge. God controls everything. And you know that I do not agree with that. Because there's one thing God cannot control, and that's us. And if that's true, then God cannot control everything. A lot of it is up to our free will. Now, sometimes we make decisions that will lead us into trouble. And sometimes it's just that life doesn't always turn out the way we want it to turn out. Take lung cancer. Some people get lung cancer because they smoke. But some people get lung cancer and never smoked. As they say, life is not fair. That's the first thing children learn. It's not fair. Well, if you haven't heard it already, life is not fair. But God doesn't do it. That's just the way life is. Now, in all of that, today's gospel, I mentioned at the beginning, Jesus says to those who are willing to listen. If you don't hear anything, think about that today, please. We are here. Are we really willing to listen to God through the words of the Bible and the words of Jesus? Or are we here merely to tell God what we want and to tell God to shape up and do it our way? Now, if we're really willing to listen, that means that we're open to change. We're open to the idea that maybe what I think is right and wrong needs to be adjusted. If we're willing to listen, we're willing to grow more into the ways of Christ. Even though we might be reluctant, We might be dragging our feet. Maybe nobody wants to change. But that's if we're willing to listen, at least to entertain that thought. Then we're willing to think about the possibility that we need to change, we need to grow, we need to readjust our opinions. Now, the whole gospel is about forgiveness. And again, our posture with forgiveness depends upon how we've been treated. If you feel you have never been forgiven, it's awfully difficult to be forgiving of others. But if you've experienced mercy, if you've experienced forgiveness, then it might be a little easier. It's never easy, but it might be a little easier to offer forgiveness of others. And then begin back to parenting. How many parents forgive their children over and over and over again? If you've experienced that, then maybe it's a little easier to forgive the hurts that we might have endured in our experiences of life. In the gospel, Jesus talks about the sinners. He said, the sinners, even sinners love one another. They do good to one another. They lend to one another. I always substitute atheists, and you've heard me talk about this before. Compare ourselves to atheists. A lot of atheists are good people. They love others. They go do to others. They lend to others. Now, if we're no better than that, where is our following of Christ? That's our challenge. To break the circle of hatred and violence by the mercy and forgiveness that we extend to others because we've received it first from God ourselves. Many of you remember back in June of 2015 where the white young man came into the black church in Charleston, North Carolina, started shooting, killed 9 people, including the pastor. His purpose was to start a racial war. He was expecting the blacks to raise up and declare war on the whites. And if you remember the story, people of that congregation came before the reporters and the news cameras and said, "We forgive the killer." And because of that, the whole incident helped in a greater bond between races in that area. That's our challenge. Now, the reward is the end of the gospel. We're going to be measured to the degree, mercifully, to the degree that we're willing to give that to others. See, God respects our free will. I think when we get up before the pearly gates, we're going to be judged not on God's standards, but on ours. The measure we measure with will be measured back to us. Will you make it? Thank you for watching this week's homily here at St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. We invite you to join us for liturgy any weekend that you might be in the area. You can contact us at mysaintelizabeth.com or on Facebook. Thank you very much.